It took Peugeot a long time to get round to designing its own purpose-made people carrier, but when at last we saw the brand's 5008 7-seater in 2010, it proved to be an impressive first effort. Since then, of course, the market's moved on, hence the need for this improved version with its smarter looks, cabin upgrades and extra equipment. What's important though is that this car's existing attributes still remain appealing. Cosseting ride and refinement, plus more total luggage space than any other affordably priced family MPV can offer. If your family needs a people carrier with 7 seats, you have to choose between something quite compact and something quite large. Now, like me, you might very well conclude that neither of those solutions is exactly ideal, in which case it might very well be worth you trying one of these, Peugeot's 5008. We're looking here at the improved version Peugeot launched early in 2014, 4 years after this car's original introduction as the company's very first homegrown MPV. For years, the brand had relied on its PSA Group stablemate Citroen to cover off the people-carrying market, but that maker's Picasso lineup proved a little extreme for some more conservative family folk. With the 5008, Peugeot hoped to mop up some of these sales amongst people perhaps who otherwise would have opted for sensibly-minded rivals like Volkswagen's Touran or Toyota's Verso. It was a car that cost the same kind of money as these alternatives, but offered significantly more space. It was a strong proposition. From a brand with more of a people-carrying heritage than you might think. Though Renault usually gets the credit for pioneering modern-era MPVs with its espace and scenic models of the 80s and 90s, perhaps they shouldn't. After all, 20 years before that, Peugeot were selling thousands of their 504 and 505 familiale estates with 3 rows of seats to larger families. No one called these cars compact MPVs or recognised them as groundbreaking, but looking back, they performed pretty much exactly the same role an affordable 7-seater people carrier like this Peugeot 5008 does today. So, how will it stack up in this smartened, facelifted form? After all, the updates are relatively minor and the opposition increasingly strong. Fortunate then that the basic design of this car is good enough not to need too much meddlement, with a primary appeal based around the fact that no other car in this segment offers more total carrying capacity. That's quite a draw, but does this car have others? Let's find out. The 5008 was always one of the better handling compact 7-seat MPVs, giving some credence to the strapline Peugeot's marketeers used when they launched it. Enjoyed by families, loved by drivers. So, for example, in contrast to the dull, rather lifeless steering that many people carriers offer, you get a helm that actually enables you to properly feel what's happening beneath the wheels. And there's plenty of grip, if not quite the level of feedback that you get from something like a Ford S-Max. But don't get too carried away. This Peugeot's real forte is in effortlessly soaking up the miles on longer trips, journeys where qualities like the supple ride and excellent refinement come to the fore. It's also worth remembering that measuring in at nearly 2 meters in width, the 5008 is a large vehicle and can feel like it, especially in urban traffic. Its short overhangs do help when manoeuvring though, as does the high driving position. Having said all that, as I suggested at the beginning, this car is a more engaging driving companion than you might expect a 7-seat MPV to be. Certainly, should you find yourself running late for the school play or needing to head home especially quickly to save that casserole you forgot to take out of the oven, this people carrier will play along thanks to the well-controlled body roll that's a byproduct of the rather firm ride. Peugeot has actually developed a system that takes this a stage further, dynamic roll control. but unfortunately this is fitted only to the top 150 brake horsepower 2-litre HDI diesel variant. It's a clever system that pressurizes the damper of whichever rear wheel is on the outside of any given bend, so keeping the car level. And to a great extent it works too. Yes, further reducing body roll, but also giving this car a surprising feeling of agility with impressive front end bite through the bends that's also aided by plentiful grip and precise steering feel. Peugeot really should offer this system on other models in the range, or at least make it optional on other variants. I mentioned the 2-litre HDI diesel engine. At its launch, this improved 5008 didn't get this unit with the brand's latest super efficient blue HDI technology, the kind of thing that you get in a rival Citroen Grand C4 Picasso, though Peugeot confided that plans were afoot to introduce the blue HDI power plant within this first generation model's lifespan. What this Mark 1 5008 lineup won't ever get is one of the brand's new generation eTHP petrol units. All of which meant that this updated car was introduced early in 2014 with 1.6 litre petrol and 1.6 and 2 litre diesel power plants very little different to those it was originally introduced with way back in 2010. At the bottom of the range, that means a 120 brake horsepower 1.6 litre petrol VTI, the only variant in the lineup offering only 5 gears. This engine's a willing enough unit, making 62 miles an hour from rest in 12.3 seconds en route to 116 miles an hour. But you can get it with a lot more performance in turbocharged THP 156 brake horsepower form, which improves those figures to 9.7 seconds and 121 miles an hour respectively. Petrol power, though, will be less than ideal if you're thinking of doing a bit of towing. For this, a better choice would be something from the HDI diesel lineup, which starts with a 115 brake horsepower 1.6 litre HDI variant, offering nearly double the amount of torque available from the base petrol model. This engine is also offered in a more frugal eHDI guise that you have to have with an EGC automatic transmission that's jerky enough to make me want to stick with the manual model despite the stick shift's rather long throw. That leaves only the top 2-litre HDI model that I mentioned earlier. In 150 brake horsepower manual guise, it'll take you from rest to 62 miles an hour in 10 seconds dead, en route to 118 miles an hour. That's a fraction faster than the 163 brake horsepower 6-speed automatic version can manage. As before, this 5008 has the kind of modern, streamlined, glassy feel that you'd expect from a current-era people carrier in this segment. A look changed just enough in this revised guise to match Peugeot's more recent design language. The most notable changes are to be found at the front, where sharper, more beady-eyed headlamps flank the kind of signature chrome-trimmed floating front grille you'll find on the brand's other models. There's a lower air intake below that, on each side of which C-shaped chrome fog lamp trim panels pick out the corners of the car. And in profile? Well, there are certainly sportier, more fashionable shapes in this segment. Even so, this one still looks quite smart, sitting wide and low to the road with a sleek 0.29 CD drag coefficient and a high waistline that Peugeot hopes will confer an impression of passenger safety. Despite this, there's a generous expanse of glazing, aided by neat design touches like the way the large quarter light merges uninterrupted into the rear screen. The square rear is designed for practicality first and foremost, with a low loading lip and a wide tailgate rising to access a cargo area that can be one of the very biggest in the class, though not, it must be said, when all 7 seats are in use. As with most rivals, that's a seating layout that'll leave you with very little cargo space to play with. You'll probably be able to fit in a couple of shopping bags, but not much more than that. There's also nowhere to store the boot cover when not in use. At least there's this 60-litre underfloor compartment. But in any case, the restricted cargo capacity
won't matter much to most buyers, given that most of the time they're going to be using this car with the third row seating folded flat into the floor. Now, in this guise, only Ford's first generation S-Max can better this Peugeot in this segment, and then only because it's a much lengthier and pricier car. Otherwise, there's no other compact 7-seat MPV in this sector that can better the space available here. 758 litres with the second row seating pushed fully back. Push the second row forward and that figure rises to 823 litres. Now, to give you a bit of perspective, that's 30 litres more than you'd find in a similarly configured Citroen Grand C4 Picasso, 121 litres more than a similarly configured Renault Grand Scenic, and nearly double the amount of space you get in, say, a Kia Carens or a Toyota Verso with 5 seats in use. So no, not all compact 7-seat MPVs are the same. It'll really pay you to do your homework when it comes to practicality. Where this Peugeot's spaciousness really is impressive though, is when you're able to fold both second and third row seating and use all the luggage space it can offer. That's a full 2,506 litres. That's a figure that no other MPV can get close to in this sector. The longer Ford S-Max I just mentioned can get nowhere near this total, nor can other longer rivals like Citroen's Grand C4 Picasso and Vauxhall's Zafira Touran. In fact, it's even around 200 litres more than you'd get from most of the much more expensive full-size large segment people carriers you'll find in the next class up, cars like Ford's Galaxy and Volkswagen's Touran. Most 588 models also provide this fold-flat front passenger seat for the transport of really long items like surfboards or mountain bikes, allowing a total load area length of up to 2.76 metres. At the wheel, where the high centre console splits the front seats to wrap the main controls around the driver, Peugeot has been clever in creating a car that elevates you for a better view, but retains the steeply angled steering wheel and laid back seating position that you get in a conventional hatch. With a large windscreen and deep side windows, it's a particularly light and airy cabin, particularly if you opt for the extra cost glass panoramic sunroof, which boosts the total glazed area to 5.77 square metres. It's all based on a design dating all the way back to 2010, but giveaways of that are few. Perhaps the lack of steering wheel controls and the sighting of the optional sat-nav screen on top of the dash, rather than more typically in the middle of the centre console. Otherwise, the interior remains one of the very nicest you'll find in this class of car. Peugeot owns the company, Verso, that provides the cabin wear you'll find in many prestige brand models. And even if you didn't already know that, you'd maybe be able to guess the fact from a glance around this cabin with its expensive soft touch materials, metallic highlights, and the lovely padded surfaces you'll find on the door waist rails and the fascia top. And storage capacity? Well, though the glove box is a bit small, because half of it's used as a fuse box, room for your family's everyday paraphernalia is otherwise plentiful, thanks to large door bins. There's a storage area beneath the steering wheel, a cup holder, an air-conditioned 10.5 litre centre console storage bin big enough for a couple of half-litre bottles, and on most models, under front seat storage. Now, as before, the centre console is set high, enveloping the driver into what Peugeot hopes is an aircraft-style cockpit, set off by optional high-tech touches like the head-up display panel that rises into your line of view at the bottom of the windscreen on plusher models. Or at least it does once you've fiddled about matching the angle of the now improved colour-coordinated graphic display to the seat height you've chosen. That seat height wide-ranging enough to vary your position at the helm from being either low and family hatch-like or high and commanding. Now, I'm guessing that most owners will want a loftier style perch, not only because it makes them feel more in charge, but also because it gets around a few of the restricted visibility issues that you'll have on the occasions that your 5008 is packed full of people. Issues that make a little frustrating Peugeot's insistence that buyers should pay extra for rear parking sensors on base trim models. Move into the second row and you'll find there's a proper MPV seating arrangement too. Unlike some people carriers, this one doesn't position the unfortunate middle rear passenger with legs astride a central transmission tunnel and perched on some hard and narrow piece of bulging foam. Instead, there's a completely flat floor and a rear cabin seating area made up of 3 separate, identically sized chairs, all with isofix mountings that can be reclined, folded flat, or pushed backwards and forwards independently of one another with a range of up to 130 millimeters. Now true, the narrowness of this cabin may create the odd grumble if you've 3 bulky adult passengers to carry shoulder to shoulder on a long trip, but a trio of smaller folk or 3 children should be very happy indeed. Practical touches on most models include ventilation in the side pillars, underfloor storage compartments, door blinds for the windows and seat back tables. Access to the rearmost seats is aided by a single action movement by which the outer second row seat cushion lifts and the seat back moves forward to create enough space for passengers to enter through the side door without ungainly clambering. Once you do get yourself sat in the very back, there's a bit more space than you'll find in smaller models in this class, cars like Volkswagen's Touran, Kia's Carens and Toyota's Verso. It also helps that the seats are set a little higher than those in the row ahead. But that still doesn't mean they'll be especially comfortable for 2 tall adults on a long trip. Having said that, we need to be fair about this. No compact MPV measuring in at just under 4.6 metres in length is going to be able to offer that. On the plus side, the fact that the second seating row has one of the widest sliding ranges in the segment means that if you are travelling 7 up, it'll be easier to tailor the cabin to the needs and heights of your various occupants. Expect to pay somewhere in the £19,000 to £27,000 bracket for your 5008, with most sales likely to be in the £22,000 to £25,000 bracket, the kind of money most buyers of compact 7-seat MPVs shell out in this country. At the bottom of the range, there's a £1,700 premium to go from the entry-level 1.6 litre petrol VTI with 120 brake horsepower to the 1.6 litre HDI diesel with 115 brake horsepower, the base diesel being the variant most will probably want. And if you are looking at that base diesel variant, your dealer will doubtless ask you to consider the possibility of finding an extra £850 premium for the more frugal eHDI variant that can only be ordered with a semi-automatic EGC gearbox. But let's say you could afford to move a little further up the 5008 range and benefit from the fact that higher trim levels inevitably offer a wider choice of engine. Let's say, for example, you could stretch to a list price of around £23,500. That kind of sum would give you the option of a bit more poke beneath the bonnet. For petrol people, a high-spec version with a turbocharged THP version of the 1.6 litre power plant. Or for diesel folk, a mid-spec 5008 model with a 150 brake horsepower 2 litre HDI fitted, a unit also available in 163 brake horsepower automatic form. Now I'd say that the 2 litre HDI variant probably represents the sweet spot in the 5008 lineup.
In comparison to the kind of base 1.6 litre diesel version that, with the same spec, would only cost around £1,000 less, the running costs aren't much greater and the performance improvement is significant. Now to the value proposition that kind of pricing represents, which is where it's important to know exactly what you want and compare like with like. First, a few simple observations. If you're going to be carrying 7 adults on a regular basis, this category of compact 7-seat MPV won't suit. You'll need a full-size, large sector MPV from the next class up, something from the Ford Galaxy, Volkswagen Touran segment, where new model pricing sits mainly in the £25,000 to £30,000 bracket. That's the kind of money you'll also generally be paying for the smallest breed of 7-seat SUV, vehicles like Mitsubishi's Outlander, Hyundai's Santa Fe and Kia's Sorento, though the third row here will be much more cramped. With that established, I now also need to point out that some 7-seat compact MPVs are bigger than others. Take two popular rivals similarly priced to this Peugeot, Toyota's Verso and Volkswagen's Touran. The Verso is around 7 centimetres shorter and a Touran more than 13 centimetres shorter. Now that might not sound much, but it actually makes a surprisingly significant difference to the amount of space third row occupants get. Take your family with you on the test drive, fold out all the seats and try before you buy is my advice. At the opposite end of the scale, it's also true that it's possible to get a theoretically bigger MPV in this sector without having to stretch to a full-size, large people carrier. Take the kind of Vauxhall Zafira Tourer or Ford S-Max that model for model might cost you up to a couple of £1,000 more than this Peugeot. The on-paper stats say that the Vauxhall is around 13 centimetres longer than this car, while a first-generation Ford S-Max just under 24 centimetres longer. Interestingly though, in both cases the total seats folded luggage capacity is actually less than you get in this 5008, so it seems as if the Peugeot designers have more effectively used their available space and packaged it into the same kind of total 4.6 metre length boasted by the two competitors that are ultimately this car's two most direct rivals. First, its PSA Group cousin, Citroen's Grand C4 Picasso, and second, Renault's Grand Scenic. You might find the Scenic to be the easier of the two to dismiss, even though in base diesel form it's slightly more efficient than this car. After all, the Renault is significantly less spacious and is saddled with list pricing, typically £1,500 or more above that of a directly comparable 5008, which at the end of the day probably leaves the Grand C4 Picasso as realistically this Peugeot's toughest rival. Because the Citroen's a newer design, it gets the PSA Group's more efficient diesel engines, but charges a premium of around £1,000 for them at 1.6 and 2 litre HDI levels that some buyers may not want to pay. It's also worth bearing in mind that the total seats folded capacity of this 5008 is 325 litres more than you'll get in a Grand C4 Picasso. That's a big advantage. In other words, you can see then that however you cut it, this Peugeot still looks like a strong prospect for the right kind of family buyer. So, if you are that person, what can you expect to find included within the standard equipment tally? Well, quite a lot actually. Try and avoid the most basic trim level as it does without some of the practical touches that the majority of buyers will want. Things like roof rails, the fold flat front passenger seat, folding door mirrors, heating and air conditioning outlets at the rear, parking sensors, and the family storage pack that gives you storage under the front seats and in the footwells. Still, all these features are fitted further up the range from mid-spec level onwards, and absolutely all models do get smart 16-inch alloy wheels along with LED daytime running lights, air conditioning, Bluetooth for your phone, a hill holder clutch to stop you from drifting backwards on uphill junctions, and a stitched leather covering for a steering wheel, just behind which are controls for a decent quality stereo featuring USB compatibility. It's a bit annoying though that there's no standard spare wheel. Key options include Peugeot's Connect satellite navigation setup, plus things like an ultrasonic alarm, a reverse parking camera, a multimedia video pack that gives you screens for rear seat passengers, and a huge panoramic cielo glass roof. That only leaves safety, which of course is well up to the mark. As you'd expect, there are Isofix child seat fastenings on all three rear seats, twin front and side airbags, plus curtain airbags stretching back to cover all three rows. Active safety features include the usual electronic assistance elements, including tyre under-inflation detection and ABS brakes with brake assist for emergency stops. There's also traction and stability control with ASR, that's automatic skid reduction, incorporating an extra so-called snow motion function that allows the vehicle to move off and travel more easily on icy and snow-covered roads. It all accounts for a 5-star Euro NCAP safety rating. Plusher versions get a parking space measurement system, so you can judge whether any particular bay is going to be large enough for your 508. And top variants also feature a clever head-up display that gives you key information projected onto a Perspex panel that rises at the bottom of the windscreen and now features a full colour set of imagery with separate shades for different information. To this can also be added a distance alert function that keeps you a safe distance from the car in front. At its launch, this improved 5008 may have been lacking the latest, most efficient power plants in Peugeot's engineering arsenal, but even with the brand's older technology installed beneath the bonnet, the diesel units in particular still do a very reasonable job in terms of fuel economy. Take the 1.6 litre HDI 115 manual model that I'm trying here, a variant able to return 56.4 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 128 grams per kilometre of emissions. And these are figures you can further improve to 65.7 miles to the gallon and 113 grams per kilometre in the 1.6 eHDI variant, thanks to a slightly jerky EGC semi-automatic gearbox. As well as energy-saving tyres and a stop-start system that cuts the engine when you don't need it, stuck in traffic or waiting at the lights. Further up the diesel range, there's not too much of a penalty for choosing the Pokia 2-litre HDI, providing you get it in manual form, where 53.3 miles to the gallon and 138 grams per kilometre of CO2 are possible. Go for the automatic version and those returns fall sharply to 44.8 miles to the gallon and 164 grams per kilometre. Also a little behind the curve are the returns you can expect from the 1.6 litre petrol models. The base 1.6 VTI delivers 40.9 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 159 grams per kilometre of CO2. Go for the 1.6 THP turbocharged variant and you can expect 40.4 miles to the gallon and 163 grams per kilometre. One advantage choosing a petrol version does bring though is in longer service intervals, every 20,000 miles rather than the 12,500 mile intervals that apply to diesel variants. What else? Residual values? Well, they'll probably be slightly above those of Ford, Vauxhall and Citroen, and a little below those of Toyota and Volkswagen. That'll probably translate into a residual value of around 40% after 3 years. And insurance groupings? Well, petrol people will be looking at 13 to 15 for the 1.6 litre petrol VTI or group 19 for the 1.6 litre turbo petrol THP. Diesel drivers, meanwhile, need to be basing their calculations around grouping 16 to 17 for a 1.6 litre HDI, like the car I'm trying here, or groups 19 to 20 for the 2 litre HDI. There's an honesty and integrity about this 5008 that appeals to me. It isn't trying to be some sort of lifestyle people carrier promoted by impossibly fashionable folk with bronze skin, a kite surfing kit and no visible means of income. No, this one's a car for the real world, for messy kids, dogs with muddy paws and family emergencies. From a brand that makes surprisingly little of the fact that in terms of total luggage capacity, this is one remarkable vehicle. To put that into perspective, here's a car that measures in at only just over 4.5 metres long, little more than a compact Ford Focus family hatch, yet it offers more total seat stand luggage space than an enormous Ford Galaxy. That's quite a feat of design, and it's one worth remembering if you're likely to be tempted away by trendier, more fashionable and maybe even more efficient choices in this sector. Yes, it's true that the extra space doesn't make this Peugeot any better than its compact MPV rivals in terms of third-row passenger space. You really will need to pay the extra for something Galaxy-sized for that. But if your use for the 6th and 7th seats is only for kids and is only occasional, a 5008 could still be all the MPV your family ever needs.